How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Catching-101 TV. As always, super excited for today's guest. On the show, we've had a number of different people from all different facets, from private instruction to college coaches to pro ball guys and independent guys. Excited to have another college coach and somebody who's right around the corner from me at Ohio University, Nick Bredeson. Nick, man, excited to have you on. Look forward to talking to you today.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate you having me on.
Man, looking forward to it. I know we caught up a little bit over winter and have chatted on Twitter a little bit, but excited to sit down and talk with you about catching and what you guys do with your program. Now, kind of before we get started, I know a lot of podcasts, they usually use the last 30 seconds to plug the person, but I'd like for you to go ahead and just let people know where they can find you and maybe give your bio, tell people about you, what you do, where you're from, and just kind of give us a little background info and then where they can find you on the internet.
Yeah, sure. So Twitter is probably my main source of content. Everything else I kind of use for personal use. But my Twitter handle, it's a little goofy. It's at Breedlewhip. It's BREEDLEWHIP, all lowercase. That was a childhood nickname that I just kind of, was like, you know what? I kind of want to keep it. I like it. Kind of identify with it a little bit. So that's where you can find me on Twitter. Like I said, that's kind of my main source of content and things like that. In terms of my own personal bio, I am currently the second assistant at Ohio University. Kind of backtracking just real quick. I played here at OU from 2014 to 2018, and then immediately jumped on to the volunteer role. Have been there for, let's see, the last 2.5 years, and then recently within the last week we had some coaching shifts, so I was fortunate enough to get offered the second assistant and have been rolling from there for the last week. So it's been fun. Been a Bobcat for a long time, but I love this place and I'm excited to talk about it.
Well, man, first of all, congratulations on the promotion. I know it's exciting for you. I know it's a crazy time with the recruiting and all sorts of stuff. I guess in limbo. So, but definitely excited for you and happy for you as well.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So, but man, let's go ahead and get into it. And I will put your Twitter handle on the screen so everybody can find you, just to make sure everybody knows how to find Breedlewhip. I want to make sure they start following you and sharing info with you over there as well. So, man, go ahead and tell me this. Like, I know you're at Ohio, and like I said, I've spoken to a number of different people who are from the private sector to pro ball guys to college guys. And I've always, the college game has a soft spot in my heart. I played college baseball. I coached college baseball for 9 years. I just I like the atmosphere of college. So one of the things that I'm kind of curious to know, and I think a lot of the people would be curious to know, is if you had to describe your overall philosophy, and you get to work with guys, over an extended period of time. You're not a private lesson guy where you see a guy once a week or maybe a couple of times a week. You're not a pro ball guy, and but you're a college guy. So you spend a lot of time with players from the ages of 18 to 22 or so. But what would your overall catching philosophy be if you had to kind of can it and put it into a couple of sentences or a paragraph?
Yeah, sure. No, that's a good question. I think I guess the easiest way to describe it, or kind of what our mantra is, or our kind of culture name, and I don't know if you've seen it on Twitter, is the One Knee Thieves is kind of our group name, right? And this kind of happened roughly 1.5 years ago. It just kind of came out of my mouth one day, and then from there, our players just kind of took it and just ran with it. So I know on Twitter, it's my name and I'm the one tweeting out the hashtag, but it's these guys that are making it come to fruition every single day. So I guess my overall philosophy isn't really anything that is different than other guests that you've had on here in terms of what they're saying. I believe that we got to find our best receiving spot. I believe that moving the ball works. And then from there, let's figure out and be creative in terms of how we can block and how we can be effective throwing from those positions. that's more so what I believe from a skill set standpoint. But I also, as a, I'm very fortunate to be in the situation that I've been in, because I caught here. So I've been a part of the culture from a player and now from the coaching ranks. And ever since I've been a player here, we've taken a lot of pride. The Ohio catching staff has taken a lot of pride in our ability to just kind of embrace each other, right? It wasn't the senior was going to start and the freshman was down here, right? It was as soon as we were on campus, whether you were a fifth year or whether you were a senior that was brought in to be a bullpen catcher, we all were going about it the exact same way. And as a coach, like I said, I had that ability to kind of shape that as a player, but now as a coach, to be able to watch our guys continue that process has been a super cool experience for me.
Well, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to speak to you. And I've definitely, seen the One Knee Thieves hashtag and seen you on Twitter and all that sort of stuff. And I'm glad you brought that up early in our conversation, because it's something I wanted to speak with you about. So yeah. the one knee, receiving from a knee, I'm in agreement with you. It seems like statistics show guys are getting more strikes, guys are being more successful in that situation. But I guess what I'd like to ask you is, since you finished your playing career relatively, a short time ago, is that something you ever toyed around with as a player, or is that something you've just kind of tried to start implementing as a coach? How did you kind of start to develop that thought process and start, I guess, honing in on what you guys are trying to do?
Yeah. So as a player, I did it towards the latter part of my career, pretty much because I did it as my primary setup, I guess. So with guys, with nobody on base, I didn't have to worry about blocking. And the sole purpose for me doing it was because I had had a couple surgeries on my hips and it just felt better for me. That was the only reason that I did it. So everything, when I look at where I'm at now to where I was at when I was playing, it's not even remotely close in terms of thoughts and beliefs. But kind of the process of how I got there, or got to where I'm at now, just in terms of what I believe in and what our guys do here on a daily basis. It was a slow process, I'd say. Let me think here. The fall of 2019, we kind of had slowly started to adapt it as our primary. And then from there, it kind of just caught like wildfire. The initial comments that I was getting back from our players was, I like it, I feel more comfortable. Along the same time period is when we started to play around with ball manipulation. They and this is all coming from them, they felt that they just felt stronger, more connected to the ground, and they had more leverage to manipulate the ball. And then the next piece kind of was the blocking. And this came, it wasn't anything that I said. It happened in a bullpen one day, and it was back-to-back pitches on two separate mounds with two separate catchers. And they were on a knee and they just flipped it over and blocked. And I looked at that and I was like, well, that looked really easy. Kind of made, an internal note in my head. And then along this same time period, our program in itself was starting to, I guess, get into the analytics, for lack of a better term. So our hitters were diving into it, our pitchers were diving into it. And personally, I had absolutely no idea what metrics were there for catchers other than, the pop time, or that was pretty much it. It was just the throwing piece. So I kind of hunkered down, did my research, discovered defensive run saved and blocking run saved and throwing run saved and all that. And I was looking at, just like we've all done, I'm sure, but looked at what the best were doing and looked at the guys that were struggling were doing. And that was kind of along the same time when the Tyler Flowers and the Mitch Garvers of the world were kind of making their name, and they were doing it in setups that were not traditional. So kind of going back to our players, like I said, there was that one day where they just blocked. They did it. Like, it wasn't anything that I said. It wasn't anything that we practiced, but I saw it and I was like, okay, there's something there. But internally, I still wasn't ready to sell out for it. Right. That was still had, 22 years of that just being pounded into me, that we have to be up in this big traditional secondary stance with guys on base. Right. The one knee was still, now I was kind of starting to break away from that thought, but still that one knee is lazy, right? I still had that just thought a little bit in the back of my brain. And I was like, okay, well, let's get on a machine and rep out blocking. Let's just see what this looks like. And then the last piece was throwing, and it happened again very organically that way, where I think we were just kind of had an open field, and I was like, all right, you know what, screw it, like let's try throwing from a knee. And that's all I said, that's all I did, and I let the guys kind of figure out and navigate how they wanted to do it for themselves. And I was like, I had the stopwatch, and I was like, all right, these times are the exact same, if not better. So from that point, the next step for me and our players was kind of right in the middle towards the back third of fall ball. I was like, look, you guys have complete autonomy to be in whatever stance you guys want to throughout the rest of the fall, right? So I didn't care if it was the traditional primary, secondary. I didn't care if it was all one knee. I didn't care if it was all left knee, all right knee. I was like, you guys do whatever you want to that makes you feel comfortable. And the biggest, I guess, final push for me behind the one knee thieves, or really diving into this one knee stuff, was when I said you guys can do whatever you want to make yourselves comfortable. For the next 18 innings that we played in the fall, not one catcher caught on any other stance than some form of a knee down. And for me, I was like, look, that's all I need. If this is what the players want to do, and they're performing at that, I was like, look, if this is what they want to do, like, let's go, let's do it. And then, like I said, it's really just kind of taken off from there, I guess. And now moving forward from that, last year, obviously the season was cut short a little bit. But we caught every pitch other than like 15 pitches from a knee down standpoint, or from a knee down stance. And, we blocked it like a 93% clip and threw out like a 29% clip. Now, obviously there's room for improvement for all of that, but I was pleased enough with the results that we had in that small sample size last year to keep moving forward with this for our guys.
Yeah, it's so funny. As you're speaking, as you're saying that, you're saying a lot of things that kind of remind me of myself and my situation when I was a younger coach. One, give you credit for trusting your players, and then also two, give your head coach credit for trusting you. I know with this one knee stuff, and there's a lot of new things. There's a lot of people who are still hesitant. Again, I feel like I'm entrenched in the catching world, and I see it every day, and I'm talking to people like you who are doing it. But if you're not, a catching guy, so to speak, if you're not in the middle of it, if you don't live it and breathe it, there's a lot of people who are kind of hesitant. And so I give a lot of credit to people who are willing to try new things, and then willing to embrace new things. And then once they see they're having success, dive in head forward or head first and attack it, with everything they can. So I think that's awesome, for you and for the entire program. So you mentioned a lot of interesting things there, and I'm kind of writing down notes as we go. I want to talk about the receiving piece, but I want to talk about the blocking piece because that's what I find really interesting. I feel like there's a debate going on among people, can guys block from a knee? Can guys not block from a knee? Should we be there with, just a primary or just runners on base, with no one on base or runners on base, all these different situations. And it sounds like you guys have completely embraced it, and you're doing it with runners on base all the time, and your guys are still having a lot of success. But my question goes back to, when you start working with the guys blocking out of a one knee stance, I think maybe one of the reasons that some coaches might be hesitant to adopt or to try it is because maybe they're just unsure about how to coach it. They say, all right, we're on a knee, just kind of block, do whatever. They've never really been taught this before. It's all brand new, so to speak. So I guess if you have a new player coming into your program and they're getting on board with being in a knee down stance, what are some of the initial teaching points that you would teach someone how to be a successful blocker out of a one knee stance?
Sure. And we actually just kind of went through this about a week ago, not even 4 or 5 days ago. We have a freshman catcher who, just due to COVID and all the nonsense that's going on, didn't get a lot of time in the fall to be hands-on with them. So just the way we're structuring things now, I get to be a little bit more, individualized with him, and we can really break stuff down. he made a big jump in terms of just the timing piece on the receiving, but blocking was the next piece for him. And I was like, look, we're going to work on blocking today. And that's to start. That's all I'm going to say to you. I was like, we're going to have a right-handed breaking ball. It's going to be in the dirt. It's going to be relatively within your body frame. And that's all the information that I'm going to give you right now. And all I did was pick it up, feed it, and just let him do whatever he wanted to do. Right. And then from there, then I think you can kind of start to backwards engineer and have conversations about what he felt, as opposed to me saying you need to feel X, Y, and Z to potentially put him in a spot that he wasn't comfortable in. Right. So as we kind of move forward throughout that practice session, the conversations went a little bit like, sorry, lost train of thought. For me, the cues there are, where are you putting pressure, right? Where do you have leverage on the ground? And it's going to be different for everybody, right? Is it in your back left toe? Is it in your knee? Do you have to get your back foot more planted in the ground to get push? And every guy's different, I think. But for me, I don't, and this kind of goes along with receiving and throwing as well. I don't like to give guys that many cues when we start to do things. I like to give them an end product and then let them kind of figure it out from there. Right now, if I can assist them through conversation and getting them to express what they feel, and then maybe suggest a counterpoint to that, to me, that's been the best process. That's been the best solution, I guess, for our guys, especially when it comes to blocking. Just let them do whatever comes naturally to them, right? Like, just like I said, I'm going to feed the ball. It's going to be in the dirt, and I want you to block it, and that's it. And then just feed it and let them kind of figure it out and self-organize to whatever works for them. Because for me, like I said, I don't necessarily like to give. And the way that I did it when I first started coaching, right? It was like glove goes, body follows, catch it with your belly button, your chest has to be at this angle. There's so many rules, X, Y, and Z, that it's like, well, that might not work for this guy. So let's let him do something that he wants to do naturally, and then just kind of give him, like I said, smaller cues maybe that you've picked up along the way from other players, just feedback that you've gotten from them through conversations, and just see if we can kind of chisel it down to what works for that player.
And it definitely seems like, the world of not just catching, but baseball is becoming more individualized. And I think there's a lot of merit to that. So the one thing, if I had to play devil's advocate, for the purpose of our viewers, if there's a coach out there or a parent and they want to, start teaching their son or their players to block off a knee and to receive off of one knee, and they say, well, that sounds great. Just let them do whatever, feels natural. But how do I evaluate that? So what would be the evaluation tools? Do you ever, I hate to say play a game, but draw the circles in the dirt and say, hey, we're trying to keep the ball within this frame, or we're trying to control the ball, or we're trying to, block it in this direction. Do you have any sort of, I guess, guidelines as to where how we can tell, objectively, that was good, this was bad, this needs improvement, as far as giving them feedback, because I think there's going to be a lot of people that say, well, if we just let them do whatever they want to do, some guys will be good at it, some guys won't, but I have to teach them somehow. So what do you do as far as maybe evaluating or giving feedback of not just the feel internally, but maybe the external, process of the results as well?
Yeah, obviously in a game, the most objective feedback is, did the runner go or not, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And that's the only real feedback that matters to me in game. We could block it and it ends up 6 feet away from us, but if the runners didn't advance 90 feet, that's a 1 out of 1 for me. But in practice, yes, I mean, we'll set up and we'll vary it a little bit. Sometimes we'll set up, kind of a half circle about 1.5 feet, 2 feet out. Sometimes we'll have them just compete against each other of who can keep it the closest. Another piece of it for me, though, is, and for our guys, is even if the rep looked successful, right, and we kept it within whatever parameter we were set out to keep it in, did it feel successful, right? Did you feel that you can repeat that same rep in a game when there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on, right? If it didn't feel natural and it didn't feel comfortable, let's try and figure out a solution to where we'll get the same end result, but you feel better about it and you feel that you can repeat that move more often, right? So yes, the visual objective feedback of did the ball stay within whatever distance we set out to keep it in, but how did it feel to the player? Because to me, that's just as important as the end result, especially in a training environment.
Sure.
Because if it doesn't feel right to the guy, then he's not gonna, if it feels comfortable to the guy in a training environment, he's able to just to go in complete autopilot mode in a game environment and just let his body and his practice take over. But if he's not comfortable with that move, I don't necessarily think that his mind will let him do that in a game environment.
Sure. Makes perfect sense. So, all right, next, I kind of have a two-part question for you. I say the first part would be, you let your guys choose, what makes them feel comfortable. I would imagine some guys are right knee down, some guys are left knee down, that there's going to be different variations. Have you found that guys have an easier or a more difficult time blocking to one side or the other versus if you're left knee down, do guys struggle to block to their glove side, or if they're right knee down, do they struggle to block to their arm side? Have you just seen any trends with your guys that seem to kind of be, consistent across the board?
To be honest, I haven't found a common theme. I get this is becoming an answer that is, I think, leaned on a little bit too much in baseball instruction, but everybody's different. But without, like I said, trying to lean on that excuse or that line, I do think there is a lot of validity to it. All of our guys block differently, right? There is no one stance for right-handed sliders that all of our guys feel comfortable blocking in. Some guys are better left knee down. Some guys are better right knee down. Some guys prefer to put the pressure in their ball of their foot. Some guys prefer to put the pressure in their heel. They feel that they can drive off to the left more. Some guys play around with where their out leg is planted, whether it's more in front or more in back. Again, I hate to be the coach that here every player is different, and like I said, I think there's a lot of validity to that, and I'm not trying to just fall back on that because it's an easy answer. But I think there is a lot of truth to that, especially when we're talking about a skill as complex as blocking.
Yeah, no doubt. And I agree. I think that's one thing that I definitely see online. I spend a lot of time on Twitter and I'm spending more time on Instagram and I see a lot of people, everybody's different. We got to let them try it out. And I understand the thought process. And yes, that is technically correct. But at the same time, it's if we're trying to give takeaways to people, it's just not simple. For me, the takeaway is it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of effort and it takes a lot of attention, paying attention to your guys, seeing what works for them, asking them how they feel, getting feedback from them. I know I get emails all the time from, parents or coaches, and they're trying to buy into this. They're saying, hey, we bought into receiving from a knee. I'm not sure if we can do it blocking yet. I'm not sure if runners are on base, if we're ready to advance that stage. Do you have any tips for me? And like through an email, it's a really, really difficult question to answer because I haven't seen the guy. I don't know if he's right knee down, left knee down. I don't know if he's athletic. I don't know what his mobility is like. I don't know how he moves. So it's difficult, but I think what I'm trying to say is the takeaway that I'm listening to is you pay a lot of attention to your guys. You probably have a notebook on them, whether it's written down or it's in your head, and that, this catcher does this and he puts his weight here and that's going to help him block better to this side. We need to work on this and gain range over here. So I definitely see where you're going. And I think it's a lesson for everybody that, if you're willing to do this, I think you can absolutely have success doing it. But at the same time, it's not just flip the switch and, hey, we're going to receive and block from a knee now and everything's going to be better because we're on a knee. I mean, it's much more complicated than that. And that's kind of the part that I feel gets lost in translation, maybe with some of the younger guys or maybe with some of the guys that are newer to this, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. it's not, just as you said, it's not as simple as drop to a knee and all of a sudden you're a better catcher, right? There are a lot of other things that go into it. That although I do think it does simplify some of the things catchers have to do, there is, I think, that much more nuance to what's going on, from guy to guy that way.
Now, I've got another question. Again, kind of a follow up, that I think the conversation is not being had enough. How do your pitchers feel about the catchers being on a knee? And I'm sure you've had some guys that have been there. Maybe you have a fifth year senior, or maybe you have a senior who's had catchers over the past couple of years, try different things and see different looks, so to speak. Do you feel like the pitchers have been, perfectly open-minded to it? Do some guys, was there any pushback in the beginning about, man, I don't know if I feel comfortable with this, or have they just kind of, dove in and accepted it as well?
I would say the only kind of resistance we saw was early on in this process. And I think it was just foreign to the pitchers, right? And it wasn't necessarily, they weren't saying no to it, they were just questioning it, and then as soon as they realized what it allowed our guys to do for them, both from a receiving and blocking standpoint, they were like, all right, no problem, like, we're on this big time. The only conversation then comes, and this is a conversation that is had between obviously catcher and pitcher, probably post bullpen, but the glove, right? And what our guys are doing with their glove. Is it start on the ground? Do the pitchers want a target? And then just kind of navigating that conversation to make sure that the pitcher is getting what he wants, but also getting the pitcher to understand that, hey, when I go down here, I'm going to help you, right? So if there's something else that we can figure out as a visual, if you are a glove guy, let's at least have that conversation, right? Let's at least entertain the thought of, maybe we don't have to look at the glove, right? Maybe we can go shoulder, maybe we can go chest, maybe we can go mask. Again, bringing home the point to the pitchers that everything that we're doing back there is to help you, right? So yes, we are here to make sure that you're comfortable, but also let us kind of do our thing to help you in the long run, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and that's actually a perfect transition, because I want to talk about receiving out of the one knee stance as well. And I kind of want to take it, one step further. I feel like the first question that always gets asked is, is receiving better? Does it work, so to speak, or or our metrics can be better, our statistics can be better because of it? I'd like to kind of move past that question, and let's go to the second phase of, what are you actually teaching the guys? Okay, we've decided that we're going to, as a staff, as a team, we're going to embrace the one knee stance. We're going to use that. What are some of the first teaching points you talk about receiving wise, whether it be with the mitt or the movements, or again, imagine you have a freshman who steps on campus for the first time, and in his high school we've received in a traditional stance, and now we're trying to teach him something brand new, and we're kind of throwing a lot at him. He's receiving from a knee, but we're also trying to improve his receiving and his glove work as well. Where do you kind of start with the receiving? Maybe, I don't know if you want to talk about your philosophy or where do you start, but I'm curious to know, again, you have a brand new guy who's new to this. What are some of the receiving things that you're going to focus on to try to help him improve?
Yeah. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to get their hand or their glove, whatever we're working, to the ground, right? And we're going to get him comfortable loading or getting his pre-pitch move to the ground. For some, that's a habit that's easier to adapt than others. But like, we're going to go target and then we're going to go down, right? And I'm not at this point specifically talking about how we're going down in terms of where our hand is placed, or if we're having any sort of rhythm or counter movement with our glove. The only thing that we're talking about is we got to get comfortable going to the ground pre-pitch. The next kind of, I guess, step or phase to this is getting them comfortable with keeping the glove on the ground way longer than they think that it needs to be, right? And I'm sure you've seen this. And again, I know I'm not saying anything that is groundbreaking news here, but the first reaction is always going to be to raise your glove up, to then to go back down, to then to come up, right? I mean, it's natural instinct. You got someone throwing 92 a sink at your face, you're going to want to protect it, right? Naturally, it's what your brain's telling you to do. So we got to break that habit, right? We got to, once we figure out how to get to the ground, we got to figure out how to keep it there. And then once we get to that part, once our guys get comfortable with that, we're going to practice moving the hell out of the baseball. And the way it's going to look for a lot of new guys, whether it's a freshman or a junior college kid that comes in that isn't used to ball manipulation or pitch manipulation, is we're going to go way over the top with it. And we're going to move the heck out of everything that we can, right? So there's going to be pitches in bullpens where it's like we're just ripping this thing up. And for me, the thought being is, let's figure out how to move the ball aggressively. And for me, I don't necessarily like at the early phases, I don't like to restrict the distance that we're talking about, right? Like if you want to rip that thing 5 feet, let's do it. Let's get comfortable moving aggressively that way, with the thought being that we can tone it back from there, right? Once we get feel of the movement, we can start to control the movement with our left arm that way. So yeah, like I call it move the hell out of it round. Like that's what we're going to do. It's going to be a fastball kind of in that bottom U there of the strike zone. And however you get there, as soon as we go to the ground, however we get there, let's just freaking rip that thing. It's not aesthetically, it's not going to look good, right? It's not going to be something that we're going to do in game, to the sense that we're moving it that much. Sometimes the pitchers are going like, what the heck is going on back there? Like he just took a strike and ripped that thing all the way over his head. Like, what are we doing? And I'm like, well, there's a reason for this, right? There's a reason, because so then from there, we just like I said, we kind of chisel it down and start to tinker with the intricacies of the move, right? We start to talk about, matching plane or matching shape of the pitch. If we're talking about off speed, we start to play around with different, some of our guys kind of like to screw and go up with their hands. Some of our guys like to start pretty open. Some of our guys get more of kind of a rock back up through. But again, the common theme there is they get to the ground and they stay there until the last possible second for them to make their move towards the ball.
Yeah, I like that. And I'm a fan of, like you said, and I think I said it in one of the other recent podcasts. I can't remember which one it was, but it's a lot easier to be overly aggressive and then have somebody tone it back down versus trying to make a small move. The analogy I always use with the hitter, if a hitter's in a stance and we're trying to make a minor adjustment to where his hands are, sometimes it's really hard for a player to feel the minor movement. Hey, we want your hands up a little bit or back a little bit or wherever it is. So you may have them over exaggerate. You may have them start way back here, or way back, or whatever it is. I think the same thing is true with receiving. Instead of trying to get just work a tiny move, if we work the bigger move, get them to feel it, then we can always kind of put the reins on them and dial it back. So I am a fan of that. I want to ask you, because again, I completely agree with you. I think the most natural thing, like you said, is especially as this is new to guys, we start, we give our target, and then as we drop the mitt to the ground, some people like to tap the ground, some people like to rake the ground. There's a number of different ways you can do it. I think a number of things can work, but I think what's universal is players who are new to it, they definitely want to get their mitt back up as quickly as possible, and then they end up having the two-piece movement, if we want to call it that. So how do you teach a guy to maybe keep his mitt on the ground longer? Is it just through repetition and staying on them and paying attention to every pitch and verbally talking to them? Do you have your guys watch video? Are there any cues or techniques or drills you use for anything like that? Because I know that's something that a lot of guys struggle with, and I also feel like it's one of those things that it's difficult for a catcher to recognize unless they see themselves on video. So I don't know if you guys use video or not, but I'm just curious how you teach some of your guys, or how you help your guys get better at that.
Yeah. So a couple different things. Yes, I love video. I probably have 3,000 videos on my iPhone of just, snippets of getting bullpens or getting drill work or whatever it is. Cause that's when I really noticed our guys kind of starting to make big jumps, was when I started to film. So yes, we absolutely film, and it's nothing crazy. It's just my iPhone, right? I've never done this drill, but I like it. I think it's super applicable, especially for the younger age group. And I don't necessarily have that much experience with that age. Anything really than 15 and below, I don't have that much experience, but I've seen this done, and I think it's pretty cool. Basically, you get a machine and you crank that thing up, and you put a box screen in front of the catcher, and basically let him just see velo with his glove on the ground, right? Let him get used to him seeing pitches come at him without having to do this, because he has that security of the screen in front of him, knowing that he's not going to get hit. And then from there, you can shadow rep a little bit. And then obviously the next step is you move the box screen and you lower the velo, and you see if that feel sticks, just because that comfort, now the comfort's gone, but he's got some reps where he knows he's not going to get hit in the face. So he can kind of figure out that timing safely. Another, and this might sound kind of backwards, but a lot of aha moments we've had with that move that you're talking about of keeping your glove on the ground doesn't come from receiving, it comes from blocking work. And what I mean by that is, yes, keeping the glove on the ground allows us to maximize our move to the ball, but it also simplifies the hell out of blocking, because now all you got to do is just flip it over and go right there. Your glove doesn't have to really travel through any amount of space, because all you got to do is just flip that thing over. And this exact situation happened about 4 days ago with that same catcher I was telling you about. We were going every other block receive, right? So he knew what was coming. It was scripted. But one of the blocks, he did what we were talking about, and he kept it down, and he just flipped it and blocked it. And I didn't say anything. And then the next rep was a receive, and he kept it on the ground and went up. And then from there, we randomized it to where I didn't tell him what was coming, but I did the same deal. I did block and then receive. And because of, and this is from talking to him afterwards, he's like, well, blocking was so much easier when I kept my glove down there, so I just kept it down there. And I was like, boom, like that makes, I never thought about it like that before, but that makes so much sense, right? You're obtaining a goal, I guess, through not even really thinking about receiving, right? The glove is still, it's the same cue, right? Keep the glove on the ground. It's the exact same outcome that we're looking for, but it makes it makes the blocking skill way easier. Therefore, he's going to hopefully do that when he receives, I guess, if that makes sense.
I think it makes perfect sense. And I'll be honest, I don't think I've necessarily thought about it in that progression. But yeah, if you have your mitt on the ground and then you raise it up to catch, and then you have to go down to block, that is a move that catchers should be able to feel. Again, when we're just receiving, keeping it on the ground for longer than they're probably used to, that's a little bit harder to differentiate. I think it's probably a little bit harder to feel. But when you have a catcher whose mitt's on the ground, they raise it up, and they have to go back down, that's that over exaggerated move we were talking about a minute ago that I think I think most guys would probably be able to feel and recognize and understand. So I like that. I think that's a great way. I think that's a really good progression for guys. So I'm a fan of that. I think that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, I'm just kind of thinking in my mind, I can see a lot of guys benefit from doing that drill, especially as they're trying to get used, to this stance, or trying to get it more comfortable, or trying to keep their glove on the ground a little bit longer for receiving. But, mixing in some blocks is going to help them feel where it is and how it's moving, and so on and so forth. So I think that's a good idea. I like that a lot.
And that was just something that full transparency, I completely just stumbled upon, right? It was, like I said, I had never even thought about it that way up until 4 days ago. And it just kind of happened. So it's not necessarily something that I have that much experience implementing, but it worked in that specific time period. And, you know, he's really moved forward because of that one block that he made. And that was it. And I was like, hey, how'd that feel? And he's like, honestly, I'm confused as to how easy that was.
Yeah.
Is what he said. And I was like, well, there we go. Right. Like that's the moment that we needed him to get to.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'll be interested to follow up with you, you know, over the next couple of months or even years, just to see how do other guys respond to that. Cause like I said, it seems like it makes sense. So I'm kind of a fan of that. I like where you're going with that. Now we talked about blocking for a while, and we could probably continue to talk about blocking. But I want to transition to the throwing, because I know there's a lot of hesitancy for players and coaches that, hey, we're bought in, we're going to receive from a knee, we feel like we can get more strikes. As soon as runners are on base, we don't feel like we're as athletic, we don't feel like we can move, we don't feel like we can throw. I'd love for you just to kind of kind of go through the progression of how your guys have adapted to that, kind of like you did with the blocking. I would just love to know how they've started adapting, and what maybe cues you found have worked for some guys, or what just some of your observations throughout the process.
Yeah. So typically the way I like to evaluate it is kind of start with the end product, right? Like, are we throwing guys out, right? And then if we are, great. Like, I'm not going to dive that much deeper into it if we're doing our job, right? I'm not trying to fix what isn't broken, for lack of a better term, right? Now, if we aren't throwing guys out, then kind of let's work backwards and figure out why. I like to start with the pitchers, just because I think in the whole equation there are so many pieces that don't necessarily fall on the catchers. I'm not trying to make excuses for them. It's just kind of the way that I view it. So let's start with the pitchers. Let's look at their times. Let's look at their holds. Let's look at what we're doing on the mound to prevent the run game. Because for me, at least in my experience, that's where a lot of the error comes in. I think your average Division I catcher is going to be a 2 flat, and he's going to be able to put it somewhere around the bag, right? And I think that works, right? Holding runners as pitchers can be challenging, especially for a younger guy on a staff getting an opportunity. So if we're not doing our job as pitchers, changing our looks, changing our holds, going, quick to the plate, everything that pitchers need to do, then I'll go to the catchers and say, hey, did we notice this, right? Like, did we know that he was a set 2 count every time? And if we didn't know that, like, that's on us. That is our fault, because, in my opinion, we have to, I say this jokingly, but with love, but pitchers are stupid, right? Like we have to think for both ourselves and for the guys on the mound, right? So if we aren't locked into, we're obviously not necessarily going to know their times to the plate, but we can have we see what he's doing with his leg, right? We have a decent feel. If we're not aware of what they're doing on the mound, then for me, that's where we start, right? That's where we have to mentally get ourselves more so in a spot where, and yeah, it's hard, right? There's a lot of stuff going on in the game, and paying attention to the pitcher's count might not be something that I want to do, but if we want to prevent guys taking 90 feet from us, I think we absolutely have to pay attention to what the pitcher's doing. Now, once we get that piece figured out and we're still not throwing guys out, then we'll go back to, okay, what are we doing specifically to our footwork and to our release? Obviously we'll talk about throwing daily in our catch play, and when we throw to bases and stuff like that. In terms of our progression and kind of how we got to where we're at now, when we started, I had absolutely no freaking clue of how to talk about throwing from a knee. I had no idea. So I really relied on just talking to our guys and seeing, again, it goes back to everybody's different, but just I learn a ton from having conversations with our players, right? About 98% of the cues that I have now internally stored is absolutely from conversations that I've had with our guys, right? So in terms of the practice environment, when we start to practice throwing outside of catch play, when we get on machine and we're going to rep it out, we started with kind of the right knee down with your right toe in the ground in the sprinter stance, right? I think that was the first commonly adopted throwing stance from a knee, and that's where we started. Some guys liked it, some guys didn't like it, and then once I figured out that guys didn't like it, it's like, okay, well, why didn't you like it? It's like, well, I can't get my ankle here, right? So I was like, okay, can we figure out different placements with your foot? Do we have to get your bigger toe in the ground more? And just kind of problem solving that way. And then if they didn't like that at all, it's like, all right, well, back to the drawing board, right? Like, let's figure out something that works for you. And something that our guys have started to, over the last probably 5-6 months, really, I guess, get into, and I'm starting to learn more about, again, just through watching these guys work, is just how many different solutions there are for throwing, right? Whether it's their right knee down and they see runner go and their right knee pops up and now they're in a traditional throwing stance, or vice versa. They start traditional, they check off the runner, right knee goes down, or they can do the same thing with left knee down, right? Whether it's they start on the ground and runner goes, they pop up and throw, or vice versa. Another one that our guys like to use is, and this is primarily right knee down, I would say, but at the right knee down and they're, I guess, in a kickstand is what people commonly refer to it as, where that left leg is a little bit further out and they see runner go. So they bring in that right leg and now it's just, they're in a tighter, kind of more compact stance. And then it's just, right, left throw, or vice versa, where they're in that tighter compact stance and they check off runner. So then they kick out and now they're in a little bit more relaxed receive block stance. I kind of forgot the initial question that you asked me. I just started talking there and forgot what you had initially asked.
That's okay. But yeah, I'm just wanting to know, how, like I said, a lot of people are hesitant, to receive on a knee with runners on base because they think, oh man, I know it's good for receiving, but I feel like the blocking and the throwing are going to suffer. We've talked about blocking and now we're kind of talking about the throwing a little bit. And I'm with you. So I think there are plenty of guys who can throw really well, from a one knee stance. Have you had anyone who you would say it's almost like a light bulb goes off, like, holy cow, this guy is significantly better throwing from one knee, or are most guys about the same? Or do you have any guys that are maybe, they haven't adapted very well and they're not quite as good at it? Where are most of your guys kind of fall? And again, I want to, just as a quick note, we are talking about, college athletes. So we're talking about guys who are pretty good athletes. They have pretty good arms. They're pretty athletic. I'm not going to say it's I hate to say average high school or average 14 or 15-year-old, but we're talking about college athletes here. But have you had guys who adapted well or maybe didn't adapt so well?
Yeah, there were a couple guys who grabbed onto it a little bit quicker than others. And I would say that's only because they agreed with, or their body agreed with, the first thing that I had said, right? The first suggestion that I threw out there in terms of, all right, let's try this. They're like, oh shoot, like that felt good, I like that. I think the other guys that didn't necessarily pick up on it quite as quick was just because what I said didn't work for them. And we, myself and with the players, had to just simply find something that worked for them, right?
Sure.
And then once we found something that worked for them, it was the same time, the same time period of, okay, I like this. It just took us a little bit longer to get them in a spot where they could figure out how to move back there and how to get the ball out of their hand.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like I said, if we have a checklist of 10 things, and I'm just making up a random number, not all 10 are going to be great for every player. Like we talked about, everybody's different. There's some individuality. And
Yeah.
if by luck, if the first thing on the checklist, it happens to be the best for player A, when he's going to catch on to it quicker. If we have to get to number 6 on the checklist before that particular player, finds his thing or his zone or wherever he's in flow state, it's just we had to go through the first 5 and they didn't work, and now we get to 6,
Right.
and that works great. So I understand that. That makes sense to me. I want to ask you a question. So this is something that I've been kind of predicting for a while. And it hasn't really happened yet, so to speak, but with guys being on a knee more, do you ever attempt to have your guys throw from their knees? Is that something you've toyed around with, or anything you've thought about trying with guys? Or and if you have, what are the results? Maybe some guys, again, maybe that's not for some guys, maybe some guys do it well. I'm just curious to know your thoughts, because you've definitely spent a lot of time and you've gotten a lot of feedback from the players, and you've been super receptive to what do you feel like works for you, what makes you comfortable, what makes you uncomfortable. So I'd be curious to hear what your guys say about it for the guys who have tried it.
It's funny you say that, because this past Saturday at practice, we were in our catch play, and after we were done playing, and I've never said that they couldn't do it, right? It's just something that I just haven't necessarily brought to the table yet. And all three of our guys come up to me and they're like, "Hey, what about throwing from a knee?" And I was like, "Yeah, like let's do it. Let's give it a try." So it's funny that you asked that question, because we're very much now at the drawing board, right? Trying to figure out, is there something to this? Does everybody like this? What kind of variations can we do here? Is it just a second base? Is it just a third base? Is it a left knee down? Is it a right knee down? Can I vary both? So yes, we are very early in the process of diving into the weeds on throwing from, starting on a knee and throwing from a knee. I got to give credit to our players. They're insanely creative. They're insanely receptive to the very small amount of information that I might bring to them on a daily basis, and they're coming up with options that I would never even have thought about, right? So it's really cool. It's funny that you asked that question, because yes, like I said, we're right in the middle of that process, but it's super cool to give them, like I said, give them an end result, and then just, okay, go, right? Like, I'll set the machine up and I'll just stay here and feed it, and just watch you guys kind of go to work and figure it out that way.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get you on the hook right now. So I know you've got your season coming up, so I'm not going to try to bother you during your season. But once the season's over, I want to touch base with you again and circle back to it and see what guys, what they thought about. Did guys, latch onto it and adapt and try it, or did other guys find that they still like throwing from their feet? Because for me, that feels like the next progression. From a lot of the players I've worked with, I feel like a lot of people would be surprised at the numbers that some guys can throw better from their knees, and some guys struggle with it. What I've said before, and I guess the listeners might have heard me say it in a previous podcast, but I feel like there's kind of a certain threshold of arm strength you have to be able to do it. I feel like a lot of college players are there, or they're on the cusp of it. And if you have that minimum level of arm strength, which isn't, I'm not saying you have to throw 95, but you have to have a certain level of arm strength. And if so, a lot of players can get rid of the ball more quickly from their knees than they can from their feet. And so it kind of offsets. So I'll be curious to see if you find the same things with your guys, and just kind of how they like it and what they're toying around with. And because like I said, I like your approach. I like experiment with the guys, letting them figure out what works, and then letting them toy around with different things. It's not a rigid set. Hey, you do this in this situation, it has to be like this, and it can only be done this way. I think we all need to experiment more and to try more, if we're going to kind of push this forward, which this is new to everybody. Again, everything we've spoken about today, if we had this conversation 5 years ago, I think people would be looking at us like we had three heads, so it's
Yeah,
brand new and guys are trying things out. And that's how the position gets advanced. You have to try new things and see if it works. And sometimes things don't work, but sometimes things do. And once they do, we kind of have to continue along that path. So that's really interesting. Like I said, I definitely want to follow up with you about that. Now,
yeah,
we,
absolutely.
we've been on almost an hour. I got one more, small topic. We don't maybe have to spend as much time on because I know you guys have practice today. I
Yeah,
want to respect your time. But the other thing that I know a lot of parents are going to be interested in, and it's not necessarily as much for the coaches, but I know the players and parents will be interested in it. So as a college coach, as you begin to watch more high school guys and you get more involved with the recruiting, what would be some things that you look for? I mean, do you like seeing a high school guy that's already receiving from a knee? If you see a high school guy that catches in a traditional stance because that's what his program teaches and that's what they do, is that necessarily a turnoff, or are there any attributes that you think that, okay, man, I see this guy now, but I think he could really be good if we make this adjustment or this change? Do you feel like guys have to have a certain level of athleticism or quickness or just whatever qualities or characteristics maybe you would look for in a high school guy that would fit well into your system?
sure. And I'll lead with this. I've been eligible to recruit for about a week, right? No, I'm not saying that my recruiting brain hasn't been rolling since I started this deal, but at the same time, I've never had to put my name to a player, right? So this is all very new to me. But with that being said, I think the first thing that I'm going to look at, talking specifically about catchers, is, and I think you know what I mean when I say this, you can tell a dude back there just kind of by the way that he is, right? It's like a shortstop, right? You can tell the shortstop kind of just by the way he holds his glove, right? His kind of just lean in his walk when he's on the position. He just has that presence or that quality about him that I think is absolutely needed behind the plate, right? So for me, it's that, does he, and I don't necessarily say or mean eye test, but does he have that makeup of, I'm a dude and I'm going to show you just by who I am back here, right? Um, is he comfortable being heard, right? I don't necessarily think that every catcher has to be the super loud vocal energy guy,
Mhm.
but I do think there are situations where his voice does need to be heard, right? So is he comfortable speaking? Is he comfortable putting his thought? Is he comfortable putting his opinion out there? Because I think that is pretty crucial to the catching position. Um, can that be taught? I think so. We have some guys who I'm in the process of that, where it's like, hey man, I don't really care what you look like at practice today, but I want you to be the loudest guy on the field, right? Let's push past that barrier of you not being comfortable expressing your voice. Um, Now, talking more specifically from a skill standpoint, I don't really care if they're on a knee right now. I think guys are starting to get there a little bit more. Just the more and more videos I see, whether it's on Twitter or email sent to me or whatever it is, I think guys are starting. I think it's trickling down, right? As any of this stuff does. I think it started way up here, and now it's slowly trickling down further and further and further throughout baseball. Um, do I think that's necessary? No, not at all. Right? I think that there are other components that go into it. What is his lower half mobility like, right? I mean, can he sit comfortably in a squat, or does it look stiff? Does it look rigid? Um, is he consistently catching the baseball, right? Like, I don't necessarily think that he needs to be crazy manipulating the pitch when we're recruiting him, but is he getting a constant pocket, right? Does it sound firm when he's catching it? To me, that's the biggest tell if we're pocketing the baseball consistently, is the sound that it's making, right? Are we getting that sound? Because then from there, if we're accurate with our pocket, we can do some things. If we're flexible, if we have enough mobility and stability in our lower half, we can do some things that way. And then the throwing piece is, are we accurate, right? Like, I think pop time is kind of a joke, to be honest with you. I think there are other things that go into it. Does the arm work? Is it within a general window at second base? Obviously, if he's a 2.9, I don't necessarily know if that works. There is a baseline of pop time that comes into play, but at the same time, I mean, if he's a 2.2, a 2.3, and this looks good, and he's putting it to where he wants to, I think we can clean up some other things that gets that 2.3 to a 2 flat, puts it on the bag, and we're throwing guys out that way.
I think that's one of the most important things that the young guys need to hear. And I say young, I mean, high school guys or guys who are at the recruiting age, and parents of catchers at that recruiting age. Again, we could beat this conversation to death, but they see the pop times online, and this guy's a 1.78 at this showcase, and this guy's a 1.85. And I've had that conversation 100 times. Don't necessarily need to rehash that, but I think it's encouraging to hear, a current college catching coach say, hey, if there's a guy that's throwing a 2.2, I'm not necessarily turned off by that. It doesn't mean that he has zero chance to play college baseball. Now, yeah, you got to be able to do other things. You got to be able to receive, you got to be able to move, and you got to be able to swing the bat a little bit and all this sort of stuff. But I think that's a very good, reality check for a lot of people that, okay, I still have an opportunity to play baseball, if I can throw, but if I'm on the bag, if I give my middle infielder an opportunity to place a tag down, if I can get rid of it quickly, if I have room for improvement. So, I definitely like hearing you say things about that. And kind of one of the first things you said, I've had that conversation with parents a lot of times, as a recruiter, you go to a lot of high school games and a lot of summer ball games. And a lot of times you can tell the best player on the field before the game even starts, just from and I know it sounds crazy, not like we're psychic. I don't have some special ability that nobody else has, but if you're just paying attention, if you're just watching the guys warm up, you see how they move, you see how they go about their business. You do see how the body looks. You see, it's pretty easy. I think most college coaches can go to a field, and by the time the first inning's over, they know the two best players on the field. There's a lot more to it than just picking out the best player. It's about figuring out who's the best fit and how can they improve. And like I say, can I teach them to do this? So I'm with you on that. I think that's good info. I think that's very helpful for parents just to hear that, and good for catchers in high school or who are looking to get recruited to hear that as well. So do you have, and again, just because I want to hit on the recruiting thing, just because you're a current college coach, and even though you haven't necessarily been on the road a ton, you still get emails, you've had camps. I mean, you've been working with players, and you've been playing college baseball a fairly short time ago. If you had to give a catcher or a parent of a catcher in high school a couple of maybe quick hitter pieces of advice, what would that be? Let's say my son wants to play at Ohio University for you. What would be a good, useful piece of information that you could tell them?
It's a good question. Reach out, right? I think this is just kind of a generic recruiting piece of advice is, if you want to go there, like, let us know that, you know what I mean? And even if you don't necessarily get a response right away, that's okay. Send another email, right? Like, I don't think it's too much to express interest going, to a school that you want to go to. Mm-hmm. From a skill development standpoint, like, be mobile. To me, that's the strength, but also mobility, right? Like, once you get to college, we'll get you strong. Like, we have guys that are paid pretty well to give you strength, but for me, the biggest restrictions that I have and the hardest time I have working with guys is when their ankles are all locked up and their, internal and external hip. It sucks, right? And it limits the amount of possibilities that they have back there. So, not saying only focus on mobility, at the high school age, but make that a priority, make that a part of your routine, so that when you get here, you already have that routine established, and then from there we can just build on top of that with strength.
That's music to my ears.
I figured it would be.
Well, people are probably going to think I sent you an email before, like, hey man, when I ask you this, you got to talk about mobility. But I just feel like it's one of those things that most guys in that age group either don't pay attention to, And maybe it's because they're just ignorant to it. And I don't mean that in a bad way. They've never
Sure.
been taught a hip mobility or ankle mobility program. They don't understand the importance of it, or know why it's important to be mobile and have stability and all these things. I think it's an area that's very neglected by that age group of guys. And like you said, man, if you can move well, if you can be in a proper stance, you're just setting yourself up for so much more opportunity to have success. It's going to be rare that you go to any division, any college baseball game and see a catcher behind the plate who is just stiff. Again,
Right.
maybe there's somebody. I'm not going to say there's always an exception to the rule. Maybe there's some guy that rakes and just has some exceptional skill or tool. But for the most part, you want guys that move well, and a lot of catchers, they're super tight in their hips and their ankles, and they're never put themselves in a position to have success. So I am really glad you said, I know I said it jokingly, but I am glad you said that, because I feel like it's an area that most guys need to put an emphasis on. And it's nice to hear that
Yeah.
from, not just from me, but again, from a current college coach and guys who's working with catchers and a guy who's super knowledgeable about the one knee stance and the blocking from a knee and throwing from a knee. And if guys want to fit into your program, they have to be able to move. You can't just be a stiff body back there. You have to be able to move. So I
100%.
appreciate you saying that. So Nick, man, I've really enjoyed your show. Like I said, I know you guys have practiced in a little bit, and we're running a little bit late, but just want to say thanks again. I wish you guys the best of luck this season. Again, I will put your social media on the screen so everybody can go follow you, and I would encourage people to go follow him, and join the one knee thieves. Start using the hashtag and join in.
Yeah.
But man, thanks again for coming on. Like I said, it was a super interesting conversation. I've learned a lot, and like I said, I definitely look forward to following up as soon as your guys' season is over, and seeing what else you've learned and how you've adapted, and maybe how you've changed some of your thought processes by then.
Absolutely. Thank you, Zan. And just what you're doing for the catching community is awesome, right? I mean, and this is my first catcher con that I was able to go to, and just to be able to sit down afterwards and talk with Ryan Cienko and Michael Thomas and Eddie Rodriguez and Zach Stout, and it was just what you're doing. It's cool, and it impacts people like myself. So just thank you for what you're doing. It's cool, and thank you for allowing me to be a small part of it on this podcast.
No, well, I appreciate you saying that. It means a lot. Like I said, I started the podcast for a selfish reason, just because I want to sit down and have catching conversations with guys like you.
Sure.
But I definitely enjoy sharing it with everybody else and listening to the comments. And I love hearing from people who are listening to the show or picking up information in some form, whether it be CatcherCon or whether it be here or whatever, but just kind of trying to grow the catching community and share information. And to me, that's kind of what it's all about. So man, I really appreciate you saying that. It means a lot. But man, once again, thanks for coming on. I enjoyed it, and I like what you're doing. I feel like you have a very kind of forward thinking approach. So best of luck to you guys this season, man. Let's catch up soon.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.